Hey guys, what's up? So, I thought that the first part of the free will episode that we just recorded was kind of blunt. It did get a point across, but I'm sure many of you are still left with a lot of different questions, right? OMS Podcast, right? I'm not sure that is that. I don't know what that is, or what does that mean? And I'm in the same boat, honestly. We are sailing down the same river of life here. So, in regards to that free will segment, I think the whole point to address, because a lot of times the free will comes down to us making severe decisions. And I say severe, I mean these are real life, practical decisions that before our brain acts upon something, we decide whether we think that this is going to be good, bad, or, etc. The whole point is that if we have this free will to decide whether this is that or this is that, we've got to be extremely careful in some of our decisions, because as a Christian you read that you reap what you sow. And instead of me trying to convince you that this is real, let me just say that this is just my attestation that I completely come forward and say I have seen this so many times in life. Right, reaping what I sow. That if I, put a negative thought somewhere out there and it hurts somebody, that maybe I get hurt that day or the next day, right, in somebody saying something mean to me. And we think it's just coincidence. But the reality is, what is coincidence? Are we talking mathematical probability? Well, even probability has its limits, right? Because we don't know all there is about probability in math. So coincidence then becomes tantamount to us believing either something is just coincident or it has this tangible mathematical, predictability scale that we can understand. This is the reason why I lean towards the Bible in this way, right? Because I'm thinking to myself, well, mathematics doesn't even fully explain this, or science doesn't even have a full answer to this. But the Bible does. It just simply says you reap what you sow, and I can come forward and say I've seen this in myself, friends, family, and just about everybody else around. A very real concept. And so how does this translate into free will? Well, it's kind of like this. You either believe in God or you don't. Now let's say you do believe in God. Then free will to live in Christ and to love others. And right now you're asking, but do I have these free will somehow to do other things, and how does that equate to God having this predestination, for me, or me being predestined, knitted in my mother's womb? He knew me before I was me, sort of thing. Well, take in consideration this, right? What is free will in the sense that did you decide for yourself you wanted to be born into this life? Because I know I didn't. I know I have two loving parents, God bless them, and at one point they loved each other very much and they decided to conceive me, and then all of a sudden out comes Poppy me, right? And then 20 something years later, all of a sudden I'm here and I'm questioning this idea of, do I have free will? No, never did, never do, never will, pun intended. You see, because you could say, well, yeah, you do. You have free will to choose to do this or to do that and make decisions. But the reality is, not unless I fundamentally know that there's this existence at the quantum realm. Because if we pay attention to theoretical physics and mathematics and we kind of stay with up to date with today's studies, we know that at the quantum level, right, there are things that can happen simultaneously. This sort of idea of this free will versus not free will, or happening at the same exact time, meaning you could be predestined, have free will, and not have free will at the same exact time. All you got to do is connect that with the Bible. Now that's not even saying you have to connect that with the Bible, but if you ask yourself that, think about that. There is another concept we're going to discuss in this many times, because I feel like it's so imperative to discuss, and that is this duality in nature. This reality that you live a life, but the entire time as you're living this life, almost like Schrodinger's cat, right? If you look at something a certain way, then it exists. Likewise, if you don't, then it doesn't exist. So that if I look at the Bible in a certain way and believe something that Christ said for us to do, right? Just believe, those who have a mustard seed of faith, right, can move mountains, that all of a sudden these things are real, alive, and they can be measured around you, that the word becomes living. But likewise, if I choose not to believe, then my neighbor, who is lovely in all their ways, if they don't follow God and they live their life and they come in and say, well, I don't have to do any of those things that you have to do or that you're doing, and my life is fine. Well, it's because at this same existence is this parallel existence between you and me. I'm choosing to do this, and I'm sort of experiencing this in my own life. You're choosing to do that, and you're experiencing that in your own life, right? Is there a free will seemingly there? Of course, in our decision making, right? Choosing to believe or not believe in God. But it does not equate to what our actions create or what becomes of that, or whether we'll not be judged in the afterlife. There is plenty of literature, even if you do not believe in God, on tons of spirituality and tons of other religions that address being judged in the afterlife or having this judgment in the afterlife, right? I remember being at the Scientific Museum the other day, and I was reading something with the Egyptians, and it said that they were weighing a feather and your heart on a scale, and if your heart outweighed the feather, then you are sent below. And you're thinking to yourself now, well, that's kind of harsh, right? That's insane. But that's just the reality of how many cultures before you and people before you have believed that there's something going on after this life. And at this point, I'm pretty sure you're probably thinking, I'm really hopeful that there is something going on after this life. This can't be the only life, right? Free will then becomes the extent to which you know of things, right? In your limited sphere of understanding, you're like, I have free will in this. But in reality, there's always something that exists outside of that, because you don't know everything and never will know everything. So the joke's always on us if we think we have free will. That's that sort of self-deception part I'm addressing, right? Ourselves deceiving us, thinking, well, I have this free will, but really you become self-aware and you're like, well, wait a minute, no, I do not have free will. There's so many other things existing around me that are doing their own things all the time. My free will, I can decide for myself, is right here in this little scoposphere, but that's here nor there. The world does not revolve around me. I have free will to believe that the world revolves around me, but it doesn't. You have free will to decide that everything that's said in the Bible doesn't exist, but you have nothing to back you up that says that that's truth or not. And then, on top of that, if you don't believe in the Bible, you most likely do lean to a scientific standpoint. And the science tells you, well, wait a minute, I don't know. If there was one way to choose or another, probably should believe in God, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that God could exist and not exist at the same exact time. And we have nothing to do about that. Anyways, if you're a Christian, then consider this, that your free will is this seemingly free will, but not to abuse the fact that you're now free in Christ. Free in Christ, not to sin, right? Which could also mean not to just fall short or to just miss our mark when we know what the mark is, right? Tons of forgiveness, endless amounts of forgiveness, infinite forgiveness, immutable love right there for all of us. But this whole free will thing is very delicate. Likewise, for the person who's listening to this who hasn't taken up the cross or doesn't necessarily consider themselves a Christian or doesn't necessarily consider themselves to believe in God, consider that all these things do exist. They're out here right now. They can be drawn to scale, illustrated in these ways. It's just a matter of seeing it in this perspective. May God bless the ears of the listeners today in hopes that we can expose the darkness together and come that much closer to truth. Thanks for tuning into this part 2 of Free Will, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Jamata, Japanese for goodbye.